Taking time to assess potential threats is no longer a luxury for businesses, schools, hospitals, or churches. I'm Jennifer Rash, and joining me for this Tab Media special report is Dan Graeber from the Center for Personal Protection and Safety and Rick Klepper from Counter Threat Group. Thank you both for joining us.
Very welcome. Happy to be here
Glad to
today.
be here.
Great.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Both of you work for organizations who are very invested in safety, best practices, assessments, all the things, and we'll get into all of that. I wanted to start with you, Dan. Your company, CCPS, I believe I've read you've helped train more than 10 million people. You've worked with
Yes.
4,500 plus churches. You particularly are in the faith-based initiative section, I believe.
That is correct.
And if I'm remembering everything that I read, you have about 30 years experience in all of the things safety related. Am I close?
Many things safety related. Yes. Yes.
All right. Good.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with building off of that experience and all that you've done. Just some big picture thoughts for churches. Why now? Why should we be more concerned than in years past? And why should churches actually really take this seriously and start implementing a philosophy, a culture of threat assessment?
Well, Jennifer, that's a very good question, and it's a question that we deal with many churches. It's like, well, we're a church. We really are these kind of things really visiting the church world. Uh, it's unfortunate. The world in general is certainly not the one that I grew up with, and I freely admit rumor has it sometime this month I'm supposed to turn 60 years of age. So I've got a few
Right.
years experience in being around this world. It's not the one that it it's dissimilar to the
Mhm.
world that I grew up in. We've got uh, it was not uncommon for me to be playing until literally the street lights went on and mom and dad expected me to be home within a few minutes after that.
Mhm.
And if I wasn't home, they would begin calling the neighborhood kids that I played with and that sort of thing. That it was really no big deal. If I said, "Hey, mom and dad, later on when I was a teenager, I'll be home by midnight." If I wasn't home by midnight, I'd get in trouble. But there certainly wasn't any thought process that I would be kidnapped or I'd be a victim of a drug situation or something like that. So there's a lot of changes that have taken place, and what we're finding is that the traditional thought process of the church being the sanctuary, a place where there is no threat, simply unfortunately does not exist anymore. In
Mm.
fact, the largest mass shooting of record in the United States currently, unfortunately, was Sutherland Springs. That was a very devastating thing. We don't like to talk about it. That certainly isn't said in any way, shape, form, or fashion to be alarmist, but it is a fact that something very large happened at a church, and the idea is to empower people,
Mhm.
help them understand what do we need to do to be on the lookout for behaviors of concern, and what do we need to do in the event that for some reason some sort of threat, some sort of violence, let alone extreme violence, walks into our doors.
Right. Right. Makes sense. And Rick from Counter Threat Group and all that you've done there, would you agree with that? Anything you want to add?
Absolutely. Dan and I have worked together for a while, and we share the same philosophies on where we should spend our time and energies. And
Mhm.
a lot of it has to do with behavioral recognition, patterns of behaviors in that may stand out in a church setting. It may not exclusively for the in an auditorium where you have your worship services, but it could be in more complex churches. They have fitness centers.
Right.
They have day camps. They have whatever they may have, camps off campus, but it is a 24/7 focus So it's all about recognizing patterns of behavior and being able to report those patterns of behavior. So that's how Dan and I how we're compatible, and that's kind of our philosophical take.
Well, and you mentioned Sutherland Springs. The church property itself, it was not that large, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of times we think if a church is going to be a target, it's going to be a larger facility. But
Mhm.
this is this is something important for all size churches to consider, correct?
It's absolutely very correctly said. Um, I live in the North Texas area,
Mhm,
and many people are familiar, unfortunately, with the situation that occurred in 2022 involved at a church in White Settlement. That is
mm,
not a very large church at all,
mhm,
and yet all of a sudden, White Settlement has national recognition because a situation
mhm,
occurred there that was an extreme violence type situation. So unfortunately, that it we don't. There is no such thing as a demographic. We can't say that,
Mhm.
oh, a church of 300 people will never see this happen. But man, if you've got anywhere close to 15 or 1600 people, man, you better watch out. That just doesn't exist.
mhm, mhm. And I've heard so many different conversations. We've done stories through our work here at Tab Media Group,
Mhm.
and years and years of talking through threat assessment, evaluating, being prepared. And a lot of people have so many different thoughts on that, and sometimes the decisions are made in the small group or with the group of leaders, and they don't always think to bring in uh, different aspects like understanding the insurance policies or understanding various liabilities or what could happen if and in all of these different things. Both of your groups working in partnership together provide training and resources and concepts and assessments and all the different parts of this, and are able to help church leaders look at each piece and detail all of it. With that said,
Mhm.
where would you suggest churches start thinking? Because this can be overwhelming if it's not part of the culture already. Where should they start thinking about threat assessment, potential risk, who to bring in to help me, that kind of thing? Where's the starting point?
Rick, go ahead. You have some thoughts on that?
Well, you mentioned Sutherland Springs. First time we did a concert with Alabama Baptist in Huntsville, and I can't remember the year now, but we were en route to Sutherland Springs. I'm on the route to the conference in Huntsville, and I got a call from my pastor about what should we do at our church. And I shocked him when I said we need to put together a behavioral intervention team
Mhm.
Wow.
that would actually if there's leakage or those that commit those atrocities, they talk about it before they happen. So
Mhm.
that person told somebody about something that they were going to do, and that's the case for most mass murderers, uh, mass shooting incidents. So that's kind of a starting point for us, and so we know that those people that commit those atrocities are they're called grievance collectors. They've had lost a job. They've had marriages that are broken up, and chemical offense. You name it. There are many different things that have happened in their life that have put them on a trajectory to they would commit an event. So we think it's real important that in the church community there are those or some composition of that. And Dan has some really good examples of how that's put together,
Mhm,
of a composition within the church of different people that, hey, I know these people. We have a mechanism that allow anonymously to provide information on someone that may be having issues, and then being able to head some of those issues off. Because there's really been, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been all the mass shootings we've experienced, unfortunately, not just in churches, but I'm talking about all mass shootings. I think there's only one so far that they did not have a predetermined factor why this person did it, and that was a
Mhm.
shooting at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. So
oh. So behavioral type assessments. That's interesting. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. There's,
Mhm.
there's a lot of, we, our group, Doug and Dan's group, we look at it holistically. There are a lot of other methods that we for equipment, cameras, those sort of things. And some churches have uh, security or security officers or security folks that
Mhm.
handle. If they're proficient in firearms, that they can assist in putting a group together. And so we think ours is on the left, what we call left of boom. We want to be preventive, and so things that would be
Mhm.
prevented from happening before they would actually get into a sanctuary. And it could be behavioral things. It could be facts about individuals that may be on a trajectory to harm.
Mm.
Rick, you're 100% correct. The behavioral threat assessment and management, current acronym that is being used quite a bit is BTAM, is something that every group, every school, every church should really begin to pay much more attention to than we have in the past. It's the behavior, and at Center for Personal Protection and Safety, that is very centric to everything that we train in.
Mhm.
It has to do with behavior.
Mhm.
What is the behavior of this individual? Their behavior indicates they could be on or may be on a pathway to violence. Let's check, let's investigate, let's be proactive about identifying a behavior that they're showing, that they're uh, let's take an example. Here's a better place to go with that. Let's say that all of a sudden someone who typically was very gregarious, very outgoing, just the life of the situation, not necessarily the party, but just someone who's very fun to be around, for some reason all of a sudden turns to be quite the introvert, just 180 degrees opposite of what they've always been, and for no apparent known reason. And perhaps they're even beginning to talk about, how great it would be just to get out of here someday.
Mm.
That's a behavior of concern. Very simply, it's the radical change. Here's the other thing, the exact opposite. Let's say that someone typically has been an introvert, possibly a little bit of a loner, that nothing necessarily wrong with them, but their personality was maybe a little bit more given to being by themselves. And all of a sudden, man, for no apparent reason, they are just bigger than life and living it up. And um, radical changes in behavior like that are things that we tend to look for. uh, Unfortunately, teen suicide, youth travesties of that particular nature are something that we've seen a rise in the numbers for.
Mhm.
So that's something that we also want to be alerted to within our youth organizations. And obviously, the church is typically a large youth organization, have a lot of youth involved, different youth programs, different youth outreaches, that sort of thing. So all of the same principles apply. We simply want to help to keep an eye on what's going on and ensure everybody's safety.
Mm. And so that makes me think, when you're saying the suicide options for teenagers, threat assessments are big. It's bigger than mass shootings. We tend to go to mass shootings
Mhm.
because that's the dramatic aspect and just the horrific aspect of what happens there. But threat assessments really are beyond that one piece. And you saying that made me remember that. I remember, Rick, you were telling me once about an assessment you did where you noticed the way the parking lot sloped into the nursery area, and the building, there was one small wall, and if a car ever didn't brake properly or something happened, it could go in and be in the nursery, and then that could have had a devastating effect, in that sense. So just even things that are not necessarily meant for evil, and things that are just would be an accident even would be part of what you all would do with your assessments and training and helping people assess. So thanks for saying that, Dan. I was kind of hyper focused on mass shootings, but that's a good point. It is bigger.
Yeah.
It's bigger than that.
The behavior, Jennifer,
Mhm.
again, everything in our world is very, very, very centric to behavior, and the behavior is very similar.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so that's why we look for the trend, if you will, of behaviors that tend to lend themselves more towards a pathway to violence.
That's good. Pathway to violence. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so churches may be listening right now thinking, okay, ooh, I need to put this on a list. I need to be thinking. What are some of the obstacles that you found as you've worked with church leaders that will hold them back? Why would we not be why would your agendas not be so full that you couldn't get to everyone right now? Why is there a hesitancy or a sluggishness maybe of dealing with this? Do you have any top tens of what's holding people back in this area?
You know, when a church leader wants to step out and say, I think this is something that we need to be concerned about. I want to make sure that we always have a safe worship environment. There's always a concern. Uh, uh, what is what are people's reactions going to be?
Mhm,
Where are people's thought process? One of the myths that we typically hear quite a bit after any of the name any of the horrific shootings or things that have happened, it would never happen here. That's one of the myths that we normally hear. It couldn't happen here. Nobody wants to think that their best friend, someone in the youth group, or what have you, is going through that level of challenge, that they can't reach out to them, that they can't help them.
mhm,
The reality is we need to know some of the indicators of what to look for so that we can help them. The one of the things that sets the Center for Personal Protection and Safety apart a bit in in what we do is it is proactive. The idea is to look for these behaviors of concern and investigate. Is there something that needs to be done? How can we help this individual get off of the pathway to violence and get back into a life that is meaningful, and help them to overcome.
mhm. Okay, so both of you work with church groups and in different levels. Help us understand why you want to focus there. Why do you want to help churches in this area?
Well, I go first. My first experience with a church that even had a security team or safety team, whatever you name it, was in 2006. I was at a very large church, attending a large church in the Houston area, on a family Christmas trip.
Mm,
And the family we were staying with, the gentleman that was there, we've known him for 6 or 7 decades. I'm going to stop there, 6 decades. And he got up with church and I asked where he was, and I was informed he was part of the safety team. Why do you need a safety team? And so that was my first experience that even existed, and it
mm,
was primarily because of executive protection issues with senior pastors,
Mhm.
where they were threatened almost on a weekly basis,
mhm,
and they were in counseling situations, and that
Mhm.
those that were part of that council session took exception to, and so they had plans. They had to create plans for the pastor, the pastor's family. Different escape routes had to go. They knew where they were. The safety team knew where they were situated within that congregation. So that was the first kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So in 2012, the next event was the Sikh, I pronounced that right, Sikh temple shooting in Minnesota,
Mhm.
and where I think there was 6 innocent
Mhm.
lives that were lost by someone that had a grievance collector went in and slaughtered six innocent human beings. And then um, my previous life was banking. I was 30 plus years in banking, and I had run that. I've done everything I'd want to do in banking, and I just really prayed about it and what I do next. And these things came back and it wouldn't go away. I had opportunities. I had career opportunities in other areas that I turned down, and I said, "This is not going away." then I actually met one of my future partners, who I did not know at the time, and our first business meeting had been pre-planned. It happened on the meeting was scheduled for June the 18th of 2015. Well, that night on the way over, I turned on the television, and that was the night of the Charleston shooting, the Episcopal Church in Charleston. Those events made us assured we were definitely on the right path. And then we tried to find. Then my partner and I, Doug Wilson, uh, were on a path of how do we come up with best practices. We weren't. There was certain routes people were going. We choose to go a different route. How we approach church safety. So those were kind of the lightning rod moments for me, how I got started.
I think the start for me was uh, when I began to realize that
Mhm.
uh, one of our more famous cliches, hurt people,"
Mm.
uh, kind of began to ring a bell with me, and I began to realize that the worship service
Mhm.
should be that time when we are not concerned about anything other than worship.
Right.
And people coming in that had fundamental differences, ideological differences, that sort of thing. This is the United States of America. You absolutely have the right to disagree, and uh, it's okay to disagree, but there is a correct avenue to do that in, and it doesn't need to involve violence.
Mhm.
Then I began working in one of the churches I was with at the time with a men's group, and we began to have a lot of outreaches. And the men coming in were uh, many people would say challenging, but
Mhm.
we didn't. It never. In other words, to the men's leaders, it was, well, these are just other men. They're just having
Mhm.
difficulties that there's their character, their personality or whatever may seem abrupt or abrasive, but that they're just coming in looking for the same thing everybody else is. And I began to also realize at that point that different people look at abrasiveness or behaviors, we'll go back to that word, mannerisms, in different ways, and
Mhm.
it can be very threatening to them, and yet to somebody else that it never bothered us. And in my past, you mentioned my 30-year history. A lot of what I've done is a significant amount of training, and a lot of the training that I've done in two or three different industries has been helping to break down and explain very complex situations in a very simple, easier to understand way. When I began to realize that helping people know what behaviors are truly threatening and what behaviors are simply people that they need to vent, they need a moment, they need whatever. And it became something that frankly became very easy for me. And I began to help people, and next thing you know, I'm being asked to assist in some things that weren't necessarily very comfortable for me, um, in pastoral support type situations and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it drove me further and further to to understand a need and to understand a desire, how can we help the people that are experiencing difficulty
Mhm.
before they get on that pathway to violence?
Mm,
And that's probably where the nexus was for me.
mm. And then you both have ended up in companies that work in that do this and that help, like you said, multi-million-dollar corporations as all the way down to the local church. Just as a little bit of a wrap up here, both of you give me a little quick blurb about your groups and how our listeners can find out more information.
Counter Threat Group is headquartered here in Birmingham, Alabama. We focus on risk reduction, prevention, providing expertise for the business, faith, medical, and educational communities through threat assessments, research, training, travel advice, and cybersecurity resources. You can find out more information from us on our website, counterthreatgrp.com, or on our LinkedIn page, which is primarily where we do a lot of our posting, blogs, that sort of thing. It's Counter Threat Group LLC, and it's spell out group, Counter Threat Group LLC, or the website, counterthreatgrp.com.
And I'll be sure to put all of this in the show notes as well, so you can link on that. But I did want to jump in, Rick. Your group, you do a pretty consistent blog posting and deal with current situations. So I do think that is something that the listeners would like to check out. You can just read about some current um, unfortunate situations usually happening, but then be able to take that and apply the concepts that they're sharing about there.
Absolutely.
All right, Dan.
All right. Well, Center for Personal Protection and Safety. We have a LinkedIn presence as well, but you can find out the majority of the information about Center for Personal Protection and Safety from our website, which is simply www.cpps.com.
All right. All right. And
Mhm.
for all churches, you all are connected in some form, whether it be a local regional group. In Baptist Life, it's called an association, or you may have a statewide or national group. In Alabama Baptist Life, that would be the Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions, and then all of the different conventions have different names for their groups. But you also could start there if you'd like as well to find out what is offered through your particular denomination and group that you're a part of. And then you've got the two here that have excellent years of service and experience and would be definitely worth checking out and talking to. Again, I'll put all the information in the show notes so that you can just check on those links and see what you find. Dan and Rick, thank you so much for helping us think through this and just to put it back on our radar.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the opportunity.